Hello everybody, welcome to this video which is about The Knight's Tale from Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. This is a summary and an analysis of the tale. The Knight's Tale is the longest of the Canterbury Tales, and it is also the first, being introduced toward the end of the prologue. The knight is also the first character introduced in the prologue, and he is the highest ranking pilgrim according to the social structure of late medieval English society. So even among the generally democratic sensibility of Chaucer's depiction of his band of storytellers, the knight and his tale are marked as uniquely important. The Knight's Tale itself is an epic saga of medieval chivalry run amok, anachronistically set in the classical world of ancient Greece. In ancient Greece, King Theseus of Athens conquers the Amazons, marries their queen, and brings her daughter Emily back to Athens. On his way back from another conquest, he is stopped by a band of mourning women whose city, Thebes, has been conquered by the evil King Creon. Noble King Theseus avenges the women by destroying the Theban army. Among the dead Theban soldiers, two wounded princes are captured and brought back to Athens to be imprisoned, Palamon and Arcite. While they are imprisoned in Athens, Palamon and Arcite are able to see Emily, the king's stepdaughter, walking around in the garden, being beautiful, and they both fall in love with her. Their competing claims of love for Emily arouse mutual jealousy and suspicion between the brothers. A childhood friend of Arcite's, who is also a friend of Theseus, arranges for Arcite's release, under the condition that he never return to Athens. Palamon stays in his Athenian jail, where he gets to look at Emily every day through the bars of his prison, while Arcite has the whole world to be free in, but can never look upon Emily again, leading to a classic riddle of courtly romance: which lover had a better deal? Part 2. Pining away in exile, Arcite has a vision of the god Mercury advising him to return to Athens to pursue Emily, which he does in the guise of a lowly laborer. Meanwhile, Palamon manages to escape from prison and is hiding in some bushes when Arcite happens to wander by, loudly bemoaning his tale of woe. Impetuously, Palamon jumps out of the bushes and challenges Arcite. The brothers agree to a duel to the death to take place tomorrow, once they are both armed and rested. At the appointed time and place, they fight viciously for the right to love Emily. King Theseus happens to be out hunting with his wife and Emily when they come upon Palamon and Arcite fighting in the woods. Palamon begs Theseus to kill them both and put them out of their misery, which Theseus initially agrees to do, but then the women intervene and Theseus is moved to have mercy. His solution is that both Palamon and Arcite will raise an army of 100 soldiers each. Then we'll all meet back here in a year and fight, and whoever wins gets to marry Emily. Everyone thinks that's a great idea. Theseus constructs an elaborate arena, while Palamon and Arcite marshal their armies. Theseus's arena features three elaborately decorated temples to Venus, the goddess of love, Mars, the god of war, and Diana, the goddess of chastity. Palamon prays to Venus to win Emily, and the statue of Venus seems to give him a sign that his prayer will be granted. Emily prays to Diana that she won't have to marry anyone, and that if she has to, it's at least the best one. In response to her prayer, of two candles, one goes out and then relights, while another goes out completely and bleeds, a mysterious portent. Arcite prays to Mars to win the battle, and the statue of Mars seems to shake, indicating that his prayer will be granted. The gods Venus, Mars, and Diana are quarreling in heaven, but their grandfather Saturn tells them to pipe down, and, spoiler alert, he grants Palamon's victory to Venus. Part 4. On the day of the fight, Theseus declares that there is to be no killing, only wounding, and everyone agrees that this is a good idea. After much bloody but good-natured fighting, Palamon is wounded, and Theseus declares Arcite the winner. On his horse, Arcite prances around in victory, but is then thrown from his horse and severely injured. As Arcite lies dying, he laments his fate and gives Emily and Palamon his blessing. Arcite dies and is given an elaborate state funeral. Several years later, Theseus, inspired by the Stoic philosophy of his father Aegeus, summons Palamon back to Athens and declares that he and Emily will be married. They live happily ever after. Description of the tale's major characters. Theseus is a famous hero from Greek mythology who killed the Minotaur and did a bunch of other heroic things. The Knight's Tale begins with the story of his conquest of the fierce Amazons. Throughout the tale, he is characterized as wise and humane, illustrating the values of classical justice and reason associated throughout the Renaissance with the legacy of Athenian governance and philosophy. His wisdom contrasts starkly with the fratricidal passions of the youthful Palamon and Arcite, and his wise pronouncements work to contain their destructive energies. Of course, the story centers around the characters of Palamon and Arcite, who both operate together as a kind of composite character, representing the fraught dynamics of the code of chivalry that they embody and that they ultimately parody. Their mode of love for Emily has no connection to physical reality. Emily doesn't even know that they exist until after they have been pining away for many years. It is rooted entirely in the conventions of chivalry, which their story burlesques in a manner that is reminiscent, or actually premonition, of Cervantes' Don Quixote. Their love instantly sets themselves at enmity with one another and reduces them to absurd accusations and rationalizations. When Palamon lays claim to Emily's love by insisting that he was the first one to see her through the prison bars, Arcite responds dramatically that there are no laws that govern love, and the whole first section climaxes in a riddle that expresses the absurd loveliness of chivalric poetry. Is it preferable to be imprisoned within sight of your love, or free but exiled from the sight of your love? It is a dilemma that encompasses the abstractedness of chivalric love, its inevitable doom, its upending of the poles of freedom and entrapment, and a million other beautiful meanings that exist on a continuum from the absurd to the profound. Throughout the rest of the story, Palamon and Arcite's love becomes increasingly violent and homicidal, barreling toward the bloody conflict that the rest of the story leads up to. To the extent that the two characters are differentiated from one another, it is through the metaphorical principles that they become associated with through their choice of divinity. Palamon prays to Venus, and Arcite prays to Mars. In the allegorical logic of medieval storytelling, this distinction makes Palamon a symbol of love and Arcite a symbol of war. The fact that Arcite wins the war, but Palamon wins the girl, suggests that the ultimate victory belongs to love. But the fact that the two characters are brothers and their overall characterological kinship leaves an impression that the relationship between love and war is ambiguous, interwoven, and deeply ingrained. The moral of the story. On one hand, The Knight's Tale can be read as an allegory of the redeeming values of the courtly tradition, an important element of the late medieval imagination. Palamon and Arcite are depicted as noble and selfless paragons of knightly values. They love and fight with passion and bravery, remaining steadfast in the pursuit of their lofty ideals. Indeed, Theseus and the other characters in the story all extol Palamon and Arcite as heroes, taking a widespread interest in the outcome of their rivalry and revering Arcite in death. In Chaucer's time, when knightly values were associated with a glamorized ideal of the medieval feudal past, The Knight's Tale may serve as a reminder of the beauty and nobility of this golden age in the history of European manhood. On the other hand, there is an unavoidably insistent parodic aspect to the story. Unlike Chaucer's real characters, the pilgrims who tell their stories, Palamon and Arcite are mythic entities who play out their passions of love and violence with an absurdly cartoonish lack of self-awareness or roundness of character. And of course, their absurd love escalates in pointless brutality and wastage that, while the characters in the story find it all entertaining and praiseworthy, must strike the ears of Chaucer's other pilgrims as gruesome and obscene. In this sense, the story signifies that social sensibilities have evolved since the days of fratricidally lovesick knights, and that what the characters in the story might consider courtly behavior is revealed to be politely glossed savagery. It is easy to read The Knight's Tale as a cautionary parable about a courtly form of toxic masculinity and the wide-scale wreckage that it causes. And then there is the added ambiguity of whether, if The Knight's Tale is a satire, does the satirical intention belong to the knight who tells the story, or to Chaucer, who puts the story into the knight's mouth? That is the knight himself aware of the way that his story, while seeming to uphold the courtly traditions of knighthood, actually subverts them and makes them ridiculous and fearsome? Does the knight demonstrate this level of self-awareness in his stories of his own profession? Or is the satire perpetrated by Chaucer making the knight unknowingly ridicule himself with the earnestness with which he tells such an outrageous tale? This question is related to scholarly debate about the representation of the knight as he is depicted in Chaucer's prologue, which lends itself to both sincere and satirical readings. Indeed, in this time in history, with the breakup of the feudal system and the rise of the middle class, the image of the knight was itself a symbol of a vanished past, and in fact, the knight of legend and romance had always been a nostalgic back formation in the European imagination rather than a historical phenomenon. The knight as a character and the nature of the knight's tale itself both lend themselves to the kind of double-edged affect associated with myths of a vanished past. On one hand, we look at the past with horror for its backwardness, while we also can't help envying and romanticizing the distant innocence of the nostalgic past. Toward the end of the story, we also get a pair of perspectives that put all the frenzy of the love triangle into a wider cosmic context. When the gods Venus and Mars are fighting, their grandfather, the god Saturn, overrules them with a monologue that portrays him as an impersonal force of life and death itself. Mine are both the neck and the noose that strangles it. Similarly, Theseus's father Aegeus, another mythic patriarch, articulates a stoic, nihilistic sensibility. There never lived a man, he said, in all the world, but in the end was dead. Between the two of them, these stark pronouncements suggest another level of reality against which all of the futile angst of Palamon and Arcite appear as insignificant absurdities, and which is so all-consuming and profound that it even swallows up the teller and the listener of the story as well, as Aegeus continues, "This world is but a thoroughfare of woe, and we the pilgrims passing to and fro." Is this a nod beyond the tale that encompasses the knight telling the story and all of Chaucer's other pilgrims on their way to Canterbury? Does it imply that the frame narrative itself is within a frame of an everyman style morality play of ordinary folks navigating their way through life and into death? Does the last word of the Canterbury Tales circle back, away from the Renaissance humanism that Chaucer supposedly embodies, and back toward the bleak chronotope of fatality and doom that characterized the atmosphere of Beowulf? The different interpretive possibilities, moreover, reflect the theme of perspectivism that represents Chaucer's greatest achievement in the Canterbury Tales, which teaches us that stories are not just themselves, but that they take their meaning from the people who tell them, and also that they impart meanings to the people who tell them. Arcite and Palamon are both imprisoned in their narrative formulas. Is the knight who tells the story also trapped by the same narrative formulas? Or is he using narrative to isolate and transcend the formulas? What stories do we tell? And how do we use them? And how do they use us?